Myanmar's military government has hosted its first international meeting since it seized power in last year's coup. Now, the gathering of what's called the Lancang-Mekong Cooperation Group included China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Myanmar's state broadcaster reported that Wang met with his colleagues from Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia and Vietnam. This grouping is a Chinese-led initiative with nations bordering the Mekong River. Potential regional tensions are involved here because of the many hydroelectric projects that are changing the river's flow and possibly damaging its ecology. The meeting was condemned by Myanmar's shadow National Unity Government, which opposes the military. But ahead of the meeting, a statement from China drew attention to the insurgent conflict inside Myanmar. Foreign Minister Wang Yi called on the military rulers to negotiate with their opponents. Here's part of that statement from China. We encourage all parties in Myanmar to engage in political dialogue within the constitutional and legal framework and restart the process of democratic transformation. But Myanmar's armed conflict, now often called a civil war, is raging ferociously and it's affecting its neighbours too. Now, last week, a Myanmar warplane was filmed as it crossed over into Thai airspace several times before attacking rebel positions. Thai school children in the area were hurried off to fortified buildings on their school grounds. Local villagers were also evacuated with Thai fighter jets scrambling to get to the area. The attack also sent a wave of people from Myanmar to cross over the Thai border in search of safety. Thailand's Prime Minister later said that Myanmar had apologised for the incident. Meantime, Myanmar's military says it intends to press ahead and execute a group of political opponents. Activists say they've been denied fair trials and the UN believes these executions could amount to war crimes. Over 100 people have been sentenced to death since the coup last year and the resulting violent crackdown on dissent. Now, our next report is about 2 people facing execution. DW has been given rare access to footage taken inside Myanmar.
Hip-hop pioneer turned Member of Parliament Phyo Thaw aka Nitric Acid is a key figure in Myanmar's popular movement against the military junta. He once worked closely with the democratically elected Aung San Suu Kyi, now herself in prison. Last year's military coup turned Phyo Thaw into an activist. He helped organize protests against the junta.
We invite you all to come together and join us in a CDM, a civil disobedience movement.
But the military brutally put down those protests. It arrested hundreds of pro-democracy activists and sentenced dozens of them, including Phyo Thaw, to death. He and longtime activist Ko Jimmy have been on death row since January. Ko Jimmy's activism goes back decades. Last year, he was among the first to call for a mass mobilization against the 2021 military coup.
This is the time for the public to rise up in unity. We need to start a movement of the people.
Myanmar state TV ran military images of both Ko Jimmy and Phyo Thaw handcuffed with explosives and weapons. The junta claimed they financed or obtained themselves. Political analyst Khin Zaw Win has known Ko Jimmy since the 1980s. Khin Zaw himself was imprisoned for 11 years, locked up for what the authorities deemed seditious writings.
Both of them, well, let's say, notable. So I think in their thinking, the junta would like to make an example of these two so that all the others would also take notes. It's already a bad situation in Myanmar. The crisis has grown all out of proportion. Passing the death sentence will only make it worse.
Many young people in Myanmar are still resisting the regime. Some have gone underground. Student leader Nan Lin spoke to DW from an undisclosed location.
To all of our comrades who are sentenced to death, including Ko Jimmy and Sayer Thaw, and to the imprisoned heroes who are still fighting against the junta, I would like to salute you all. Until our comrades and our people get freedom, I'll continue to take part in this revolution no matter what. Our revolution must prevail.
Recently in Yangon, youth activists unfurled banners protesting the death sentences. The flash mob just as quickly melted away. Worried, the military would also come for them.
Let's speak now to Burmese-American journalist Min Ten, features editor at Frontier Myanmar, currently based in Bangkok. Welcome to DW News Asia. We've just been hearing about the military's plans to execute these two activists. Over 100 people have already been sentenced to death by the military, but these would be the first to be carried out. Why do you think is the military turning to the death penalty to stamp out resistance?
So this isn't just the first death penalties that will be carried out since the coup. It will actually be the first death penalties carried out in the country since 1988. In Myanmar, the death penalty has existed for quite a long time, and people have been sentenced, but successive regimes have actually generally tried to avoid going to this level of escalation in terms of dealing with its opponents. I think some of the motivations that people have been speculating on in terms of why they're doing this is that, one, it could be revenge for killings by resistance forces, or simply to try to scare the resistance, to show them that, they're willing to even go further than other regimes in the past have. Some have also speculated that this is a show of power for the military supporters, many of whom are being killed in the streets now, who might also themselves be thirsting for revenge. And others have also speculated that this might be a way for the military to just show that they are in charge, that they are able to embody sort of the ultimate government power, which is to take the lives of its citizens. And this is especially significant as Go Jimmy and Go Pyozia are both former politicians, and so they are not just sort of resistance, but also political enemies.
Okay, so you've run through some of the motivations there. In your opinion, do you think these executions will maybe terrorise people into submission, or will people maybe be galvanised to protest and speak out?
I think considering the fact that most people in this country are now at risk of military violence, especially in the areas of the country where there is active conflict, this will likely serve to just further delegitimize the regime in the eyes of the majority of the country, who not only see this as a regime that came through power in a coup, but now are violating even the most basic understandings of what a government of Myanmar does, which is definitely not to carry out death penalties. And it could also have the effect of making negotiations in the future harder should the military decide at any point to try to do dialogue with any of its enemies. And it may alienate allies in the region who have now spoken out against the announcement of the execution.
Now, I want to pick up on two words you said there, legitimacy and negotiations. China has been calling on the military in Myanmar to hold talks with its opponents. What is your take on China's motivations, China getting involved now?
So China has been fairly consistent in calling for a political resolution to what has happened in Myanmar, and the recent announcements from China have been relatively in line with that. China really wants to see a stable nation on its border. Myanmar has been a place where it wants to do trade, extract natural resources, as well as have a safe access to the Indian Ocean. What seems to be different, or what seems to have changed recently, is that China is now calling for dialogue between all parties. And it's also recently stated that all parties have reasonable demands. And this sort of shift in language indicates to a lot of analysts that China may be calling on the Myanmar military to start making compromises and to start regarding those that it has determined to be or sort of branded as terrorists as legitimate stakeholders in the discussion of Myanmar's future. And China's also recently started using language around restarting democratic transition, which some others have interpreted as meaning that China is actually indicating a support for the military's plan for an election in 2023.
Some of these efforts you've outlined from China are things that ASEAN has also been doing, but its efforts to help bring peace to Myanmar have stalled. Should ASEAN, which we should point out is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, should it change tactics, do you think?
So the ASEAN has largely been working with the military in terms of sort of who it determines to be primary stakeholders in the discussion about Myanmar's future. That means that it has not been meeting with the arrested elected lawmakers from the 2020 election who were overthrown during the coup. It has not been meeting with the parallel civilian government that has risen up since the coup, and it has not largely been meeting with ethnic armed organizations who have also been in conflict with the Myanmar military for decades. And so when it comes to ASEAN, what we're really seeing is an association that is largely following the lead of the military, even as it's willing to criticize it. And I think many are calling for it to take a much more robust leadership role and to start making decisions that are not necessarily being pre-approved by the military regime.
Hey, we've got about a minute left. You and I recently spoke about Myanmar's elections happening next year. I was wondering if you could just talk to our audience about what you're most concerned about in these elections next year.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the elections, it would be an election run by the military, and it would only allow for parties that its election commission have deemed as legitimate political parties. And so the concern here is that, first, the military is not the legitimate authority in Myanmar to be running an election, and that people would or that the military would essentially be using this as an excuse to try to create the veneer of democracy in Myanmar, and that the international community, once there is a quasi-legitimate, quasi-successful election, that the international community will sort of lose interest and stop pushing for greater change in Myanmar.
That was journalist Amin Ten. We really thank you for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.